Pixie here again, and today is a very special day, and it's my birthday, woohoo! Which obviously some of you knew about because I think it was mentioned in my last video that it was my birthday, and today's the day. I am very old. I am even older than I was when the last time I said I was very old. So as you can see, we have a special guest again.
We've been invited to spoil you rotten.
What?
You've invited me to spoil you rotten, haven't you?
No, I haven't. You don't spoil me rotten. You insult me all the time.
I do not.
The day you spoil me rotten by not insulting me all the time is the day that I'll drop down dead.
I've never... No.
Anyway, so as Dan is here, I really wanted to do a discussion video. And as disability is something that both Dan and I know quite a bit about, since we are both disabled, I decided that we would do another disability video. Do you want to remind everyone what your disability is?
I am totally blind. One of my eyes is plastic, incidentally. And I don't hear as well as I would like. Yeah, so if he asks me if he says, he can't hear me, then I'll obviously repeat things. I actually find that far more annoying than being blind. I can imagine. Although that being said, I've never been able to see, so I suppose if I could see, if I had been able to see, maybe I would, find being blind more annoying than, But I've always thought that it would be better to be blind than deaf, because you can explain to a certain degree at least, like say you talk about rolling hills and green fields and lush pastures and rushing waterfalls and all that. You can describe that to a certain extent. Someone can't see. How on earth could you convey something like Beethoven's Fifth Symphony? Da 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 da. How on earth would you even begin to try and convey that to a deaf person? But then, of course, that's the same thing with something like a Jackson Pollock painting, which is all sort of like blobs, and Jackson Pollock is like a modern artist who his paintings are all sort of like like drizzles and blotches and things like that. And how even sighted people don't get that and look at it and say, "Oh, it's spilled all paint on that, hasn't it?" Well, yes, but that's the same with music. Like, for example, music, heavy metal music, there are some people that are like, oh god, that's just noise, for example. So I think that heavy metal is like a Jackson Pollock painting. Oh, yeah, but what I'm trying to get at is that even your picture, you could up to a point try and describe that to a blind person, but as I say, there is no way on earth that you could ever, in my opinion, you imagine with a pen and paper, or however you communicate with a totally deaf person, sign language. And maybe I'm showing the depths of my ignorance here, not being deaf. And my sincere apologies to anyone who is deaf and thinks they can appreciate music, because I don't know. But this is just... Of course you can to some degree, because I hear that you can sort of feel the vibrations. Like say, for example, you can sort of, example, if you go to a concert and you can hear you can feel the bass. You can feel like a sort of the vibration of the bass, like inside you, sort of your chest a bit. So that wouldn't give you the melody, but anyway, it would to some degree. I think it would give you the rhythm, maybe not. Yes, the rhythm, but that's I'd say. It's a complicated question. I think it very much comes down to person. For example, I would rather be blind than deaf, I think. Yeah, well, I'd say I would too, definitely. As I say, because of that, because I don't think that, as I say, I mean, I'm talking about now my perspective of trying to explain music to a deaf person. Yeah, do you know what I mean? I certainly couldn't live without music. Not so much a deaf person's ability to experience. They might get an entirely different realm of experience and enjoyment from the same thing. I just mean that it would be impossible. Yes. For a hearing person to convey, what the experience of listening to something like Beethoven's Fifth was like, in that way. But anyway, sorry. I think if you turned it up loud enough, you might be able to sort of, if you put your hand against the speakers and sort of felt the sort of the rhythm of the vibrations. Maybe, possibly. But like, all you would kind of get would be.
not necessarily, because you get degrees of vibration, wouldn't you?
I suppose.
For example, for higher notes, you'd get less vibration. For lower notes, you'd get more vibration. So you would be able to sort of feel...
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do apologise. We're kind of drifting off, aren't we?
Yes. So we are. That is. We're both good at that. I do that quite often. So anyway, because we Dan and I talk about disability quite often, I've got some questions that I really want to discuss in detail. So I think this might end up being quite a long video. I've got some questions that I really want to discuss with Dan in detail.
I would just like to make a quick comment because...
Well, you can while I find the questions. Carry on.
It's interesting because, we have been describing ourselves as disabled. Now, this has made me think, and I've thought a lot about this over the last few months, actually. I know a lot of disabled people today who really detest the word handicapped. Now, I understand why, up to a point. It has a sort of a flavour of the era of when disabled people were sort of shoved out of sight and out of mind in institutions and all the rest of it. But if you think about it, in some ways, the word handicap, I mean, I've never had a problem with it. I think because...
I don't even know what it really means or the etymology of it.
It's just an alternative word to disabled. Now, when I was little, the word handicap was bandied about quite a lot. Yes. I was described as handicapped, visually handicapped.
Oh, I was described as special needs. And really, that's horrible. That's awful.
That is horrible. But as I say, a lot of disabled people now will sort of run you through if you describe them as handicapped. But if we think about it, actually, the word handicapped is in a way a more positive word than disabled, because to be handicapped means to be disadvantaged, to have barriers put in your way by someone or something else, whereas to be disabled is to be we're
somehow less than enabled.
Yeah, but to be broken.
Do you know what I always use when someone says, "Oh, I'm disabled"? I always say, "No, I'm specially abled."
That's a good one. That different. In fact, some people do say that they're differently able, don't they? Say that, don't
differently
they?
Abled, yes.
Differently abled.
In a way, everyone is specially abled, but
we all have different needs. I saw a wonderful article once about the difference between the medical and the social models of disability. How we shouldn't think of disabled people as being disabled, having a medical problem. Well, all right, they do, and if you can treat that. But I mean, we shouldn't think of them, in social terms of having a medical problem. They're just people who have different needs, as we all have different needs or different abilities. Some of us can run faster than others, or whatever.
I was watching something the other day, and we are again getting off the subject, but it doesn't matter because this was always going to be a discussion video. I saw something about how disabled people shouldn't exist because in the past, obviously, before we have this life of convenience, in the past, people with disabilities were, survival of the fittest. We were sort of just killed off. And so therefore the reason why disabled people exist today is because of this life of convenience that we have, and we should have been killed off as survival of the fittest type thing.
I think that sort of is nullified by the fact that, of course, if you go back in history, there were disabled people. Obviously, I would imagine that more of them were people who had already become disabled later. And I think, actually, I don't know, I wonder what the statistic is, if more people, whether the higher percentage of people who have acquired, so to speak, their disabilities in later life, or people who've been born with disabilities. Back before sort of universal healthcare and the sort of medicine we have today, obviously the vast majority of people who were disabled would have been people who became disabled in later life simply because people who were born disabled in those days just wouldn't have survived anyway, because they wouldn't have had the medical.
Well, if they were blind, maybe, but not if they had, for example, my disability, where I literally couldn't be alive if it weren't for the medication that I get. I've known since I was very young. My mum has told me that if it weren't for my medication and the medical support that I did have and do have, that I would just not have lived. I would have died when I was very small. probably wouldn't have even made it to age 1, basically, because of my disability, my condition.
I don't know. Well, I don't know.
Anyway, should we do these questions?
Sorry.
Right. So this is the first one, and this is kind of a bit close to my heart in a way. Is disability something that you should advertise in social media or tell people when you first meet them, or is it something that you should not volunteer? For example, like, you know how some people have on their Facebook profiles, I am blind, or I have ADHD, or I have autism, or I have cerebral palsy, or whatever it is. Is it something that you should advertise, or is it something that you should not? Because some people think that it's something that people should find out, that you know, to advertise it means that you're seeking attention for it, but then some people think that it's almost dishonest by not putting it, because it's and some people, I don't know, and some people think that it helps people to sort of find common ground with people. If you have autism or ADHD or depression or whatever, or you're or blind and deaf, and you can talk to people who are blind and deaf, and you get sort of the solidarity thing. Is it something that you think it should be hidden or not?
I don't think it's a case of should or shouldn't in any case, really. You know, I mean, this is interesting because it brings up a dilemma that I always have when setting up. I don't suppose I'll ever do this again because I've pretty much given up on the whole business, really. But when setting up profiles on dating websites, because I think, do I mention being blind? Will it, you know, should I mention it?
Yeah.
Out of honesty, or, you know, is it dishonest not to mention it, or would it simply be a turn off? Oh, I'm blind. Oh, no, interested in him. You know.
Exactly. I always feel like, you know, and the reason why I'm still single to this day is because I sort of think, you know, the minute that someone finds out that I'm partially sighted, they're gonna be like, oh, I don't like her. I don't want to have a burden around my neck, sort of thing. Like, oh, I might have to look after her. And of course, especially on dating websites, meeting me, I'm obviously, as you know, a very independent person. But if you sort of knew that I was partially sighted without knowing how independent I am, you would possibly come to the conclusion that I would be a sort of burden on you, and so therefore it would be a turn off. But at the same time, not putting it would be a dishonest thing, because then you arrive at a date and you sort of like, oh, and you have your cane, for example, and then they're sort of like, oh, you're blind, you didn't tell me.
I think that would be, you know, I think that would be, if I'm honest, I mean, all right, if a blind person or whatever decided to do that for their own reasons, I would not exactly condemn it, but I would kind of feel that was a bit dishonest. But I have had the experience of, you know, meeting someone, having a very nice chat and whatever, and then having to say, look, I should probably tell you I am totally blind, and then I have then not heard from that person again, or being laughed at again, and that, or being laughed at, and that is a very, very, you know, that is
that's awkward,
a crushing experience. It is,
yeah,
you know, the most awful experience, and unfortunately, you know, we've come a long way with disability.
Yes, we have.
But I think, you know, we also still have a long way to go.
That's true, but I feel like people sometimes, and this is something that I see so much on social media, that people sort of say, oh, we still don't accept disability, we still don't accept depression and, you know, various mental conditions, and I keep thinking that's true. You know, we could go a lot better, we could get a lot better at accepting different mental conditions or physical, but how far we've come from, like, you know, even back to, like, say the 50s, when still people were sort of, it was, you know, you couldn't really walk out and about and sort of be like, you know, accepting. You wouldn't talk about the fact that you had depression. You wouldn't even know that depression existed.
I don't even think it would. I'm not even sure it existed in those days as a medical.
But if you did have a sort of mental condition, you wouldn't talk about it. It would be something you would just hide. No. And now it's open. People hear about it on social media, and yet I still hear people complaining, oh, you know, people aren't accepting of my mental condition, without really understanding how far we actually have come and accepting that and feeling grateful that we live in a time that we do live in.
I mean, I had depression. Well, I was diagnosed with depression. I don't know whether I had depression. That might sound a bit strange, but yeah. I wondered if people who really had depression would think of what I went through as depression. But it was still hard, you know, for me.
That doesn't matter, you know, because nobody else can know what else is in, you know, no one knows what is inside your brain, and you don't. So it doesn't matter.
I felt very negative about everything. I felt that the world was just, you know, very pointless place, and I didn't feel that. But anyway, the thing was that, like, the reason I bring it up, you know, someone in my family found that very, very difficult to, you know, to understand, they couldn't understand what was wrong, you know, because I hadn't broken my leg or, you know, fallen off a cliff or anything, but I was
Was it an older member of your family? Or...
It was an older member of my family, yeah.
Yeah, well, like I say, I mean, back going to, like, the 50s, for example, the 60s, you know, that even that sort of close a time, you know, ago, even that short distance of, you know, we've come so far, and I think that when people harp on about how there's, you know, still, you know, acceptance of you know, mental sort of conditions and you know, and mental disabilities, you know, you know, they always say, oh, you know, people still aren't, you know, accepting it, and I keep thinking, stop thinking about how far we have to go and think about how far we've come.
I think you have to kind of think of a bit of both sometimes. You have to be grateful for what is here, and you have to be honest about what is still not here. I think the thing is to avoid sort of, you know, really being bitchy about it, because that just makes you look, I can't think of the word, but you know what I mean, sort of, you know, a bit whingy, you know, if you sort of constantly highlight the negative sides of it. And it's easy to do. It's easy for me to do.
Yeah.
You know,
I think human beings are sort of a very patient species, aren't they? They're constantly wanting the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And I'm certainly guilty of this too.
And I think that's actually I'm drunk. An essential survival, what's the name? Sorry, my brain. We've had a big meal.
A survival instinct. Yes, we have had a big meal, yeah.
A survival trait, that's the word I want.
Yeah.
We've had a big meal, and a big meal always turns my brain to jelly.
It turns your drain, does it?
Yeah, no, I think it's only, you know, I reckon that is, you know, the source of man's sort of evolutionary progress or whatever, you know, our development into the species that we are now, and you know, the planet-wrecking monstrosities that we now
Yes. Oh, I was watching this, and without really wanting to get too much into it, but I was watching something on YouTube the other day, and how people were getting upset about an episode of, I think it was either South Park or Family Guy, where we were sort of, you got to see inside, like, some a thing to do with headlights, and where they went into someone's, like, hair, and they became headlights, and there was sort of, you know, the person who was narrating it sort of saying, oh, and they were comparing us to parasites, and I sort of had a bit of a laugh and thought, well, we are parasites. We take and we take and we take, and rarely do we give. You know, we take this Earth's natural products without, obviously, this is supposed to be a disability talk, not really an environmental talk, but we are parasites, essentially, we are.
I think throughout that, I don't like it very much, but I think I would kind of find it rather hard to argue with that.
Yeah.
I would. I don't like it, but I would actually find it quite hard.
Yes, I do. It is a unfortunate truth of our species that we don't give half as much as we take.
I think one of the biggest problems is we waste so much.
Yes, and I am also guilty of this. It's something I want to change about myself, and I'm making every effort to change, but we do waste so much.
It's like, you know, the other day we had, what did we cook? I mean, at home, not me and Trixie. We had some meat or other. It must have been chicken, I think. And took the bones out and put them in the rubbish. And I said, half jokingly, "Oh, you took the bones away. We could have made them into soup."
Yeah.
And it's true. We could have done, or we could have made you know, I don't know, stock with them or something for a stew.
Exactly, because I mean, I was watching Back in Time for Tea. It's a British program that's on at the moment.
I've not seen that yet.
You know what, you need to watch it, it's fabs. I mean, it was talking about how they would do that, you know, and everything.
Oh, yeah.
You know, even like, say, they made roast dinner, and the fat was made and used and put on toast the next day, you know, as a spread. You know, everything was being used. We are so wasteful these days.
I've got books about that. You know, skim the fat off it, and you know, put it, you know, somewhere.
Exactly, yeah. And, anyway, should we continue on to the next thing?
Sorry, yeah.
No, I know, because we just.
Well, go on. I think to summarise, we were talking about, should you advertise your disability?
Yes.
That's an interesting expression. I didn't even think about it.
Advertise. Yeah, no, that's how I put it on the question.
Buy disability, cheap at half the price. I would say it's a matter of personal preference. I think I would say that you should be able to say that I'm blind or whatever, or I'm
paraplegic.
That word, that and all. Or whatever, I have this disability, I have these needs. People should accept these things, but I also know that a lot of people don't, and it's very sad. A lot of people are.
I think it should be a thing that. I think it should be a thing where people, who potentially wouldn't, go out with a disabled person, that they would be made to sort of understand that just because you're disabled doesn't mean you're incompletely, that you're completely unable to do anything for yourself. That yes, there's things that you can't do. That's the whole nature of being disabled. But there are, there's in my case, there's a lot that I can do. And
I can understand people having concerns, but.
Maybe just asking, what can you do?
That's it.
And therefore, especially on a first date, if you sort of say, "Oh, you're blind. What is it? Can you do? How much can you do for yourself?"
I think the problem, and I personally, to a point, I blame certain ultra-sensitive disabled people for this. I know some disabled people who just seem to get upset at the least little thing that people say, and I think this has created a problem as well, of people being actually afraid to ask questions or well upset. Yeah. I tell you an interesting thing, this isn't actually about questions, but the other day I went to see the doctor. She was a very nice lady, I think she was Indian, and it was about a little problem I was having with my eye, my socket.
I'm glad you said eye. I was worried that you would say something else.
No, with my eye, I had a bit of an infection. And she had a look at this and said, we'll give you some antibiotics. It's best to keep an eye on it. And I said, I sort of laughed and said, "Oh yes, that's a good one. Keep an eye on it." And this doctor was like, she was actually, she thought that she had upset me by saying keep an eye on it. All I was saying was it was funny to keep an eye on your eye. Do you know what I mean? You've got to watch one eye with the other eye. But she actually thought that because I couldn't see, she had upset me.
Actually, that links into the next question a bit. Okay. So I'm glad you actually said that. Right.
So to summarise the second time. To absolutely summarise that first question, I think it's a matter of ultimately preference. I think you do what you feel is right for you.
And I think it's also a thing where you shouldn't be afraid to ask questions because, in the end, I think that most disabled people will understand that you're just being curious.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's. For example, if someone always says to me, "What can you see?" There's part of me that's sort of like, "Oh, I have to answer this question again, do I? Really?" But then the other part of me is sort of like, "Well, they're just finding out, and it's better that they do find out than not."
Oh, yeah,
so I think not being afraid to ask the questions, and if they are offended, then that's not your fault. That's them and their insecurities about their disability. But it's probably better to ask than not, and certainly it's better to give the person a chance rather than just sort of judge on face value and not and possibly losing out on the opportunity to actually make an amazing relationship.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's move on to the next question. That's been put to rest, right? Yeah. Sorry. Yep. Right. So I was watching a YouTube a video on YouTube, which I'll link below.
You watch a lot of videos on YouTube, don't you?
A lot of the ideas. Yes, I do. YouTube is my home. I was watching a video about dick things to do to blind people, like jokes about blind people, sort of jokes to make about blind people. Like sort of, there was one where the blind guy dropped his dog's lead, and the guy just walks off with the dog. And so the thing is, half of the people on the comment section down below of it were sighted people, non-disabled people that were getting offended about it. And I remember in college, obviously you and I went to the same college, and it was a college for blind and partially sighted people.
We did.
We used to make so many jokes about blind people. Like, what's the definition of cruelty? Putting a blind person in a round room and saying your food's in the corner. We used to make so many jokes about us. Exactly. You're right there.
Yeah.
It's like, sighted people, non-disabled people get so offended when people make blind jokes. And it's so funny to us because, as you've seen, we laugh at these jokes more than anybody else. And so there's this thing of, is it right to make jokes? Because someone did bring up the fact, the point that, if a kid saw this, they would think it would be okay to sort of...
Yeah.
So there is that, but at the same time, nobody laughs at ourselves more than we do. Right?
Oh, I mean, there was a game for blind people, and you used to do like, it's a bit complicated to describe, but a bit like the extras on a DVD.
Yeah.
Well, if you completed a certain level of this game, you got these little extras, and some of these extras were a series called Things Blind People Just Shouldn't Do.
That sounds awesome.
And they were hilarious. Because one was traffic reporting. And you know how they do the travel news from a helicopter?
Yes.
So, and they said, now over to our blind eye in the sky, Blindykin. Well, I'm flying over the freeway, and I'm just going to lean down now and And then we had, what was the other one? He did one called The Blind Handyman, where he could have drilled holes in his hands and all this sort of thing. I'm trying to remember what the other blind people just shouldn't do was. But I can't remember. So
what was the thing that you did? And you said a blind secret agent.
That's right.
Ah.
That was
See, nobody laughs at ourselves more than we do,
and
right?
Said, it was hard work getting my long cane into this ventilation shaft. So I can sneak quietly through the building, and you tap. Well, at least traditionally, with a long cane, you tap it on the floor. So he's going along this ventilation shaft, clang, clang, clang. And then I did another one about a blind person trying to be a pilot, flying an aeroplane.
Anyway, so I don't understand why it is that the able people get so offended about disabled jokes.
And I think there's a difference. Like, I remember once I told a joke when I was quite little. I'd heard somewhere, what do you call a dinosaur with no ears? And the answer is anything you like. It can't hear you. And one of the members of staff said, that's all right if you say a dinosaur, but if you say a man, that's offensive to deaf people. And I think there's sometimes there can be a difficult barrier. When is a joke sort of about a disability, and when is it against? Do you know what I mean? When is it sort of deliberately sort of mocking and being nasty?
Yeah, because it was, for example, I was watching, and that is it's the only time when I actually have got offended at a blind or a disabled joke, and it was about Katie Price's son Harvey. You know about him?
No.
Well, Katie Price, Jordan.
I have heard of the lady.
She has a son called Harvey.
Oh yes.
Who has the same disability as me, septal-optic dysplasia.
Oh,
and he's got it worse. Not when I say he's got it worse than me, he doesn't have it worse. He's got some aspects of it worse than me, and some aspects of it aren't.
Yeah.
But he's very sort of. I'm trying to say this in the PC way here. He's very sort of. He has learning difficulties. Basically, he's sort of mentally. That sounds awful. Mentally challenged. That sounds awful. It does.
It does.
Do you know what I mean? He's got mental disabilities.
I think just on a side branch, I think in particular about a mental problem, I think it is very, 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 very hard indeed to come up with a term that actually sounds
not
nice.
Offensive, exactly.
I think it's very hard.
Yeah, it is hard. Anyway, the point is, there was Frankie Boyle. Have you ever heard of Frankie Boyle?
Yes, I have. I've never heard Frank. I've never heard him do anything, but I know he's very. He likes to joke about controversial things. I know.
Yes. Now I'm not going to say the joke that he said, because obviously I know that a lot of my viewers are younger, and I don't think it's appropriate. But he said a very, very, and I'll tell you about it later. It completely enraged me. It's the only, like I say, it's the only thing that's ever really offended me. And I think that I think there's sort of. It really does depend on the tone, I think, more than anything else. You know what I mean?
Now, this is interesting because I remember, and it might, the interesting thing is, it might even have been about the same thing. I don't know. But somebody was saying about some joke that Frankie Boyle had made about disabled people. And
yeah, it probably is the same
I
thing.
remember the presenter saying something like, oh, well, if you're going to go and see Frankie Boyle, that's kind of what you have to expect. And I did think then, and I wonder now, is it right that... I mean, I'm not normally a censorship kind of person. I don't generally approve of censorship. But, is it actually right for us to kind of say, oh, well, you should expect that sort of joke from that sort of person? Are there some jokes that perhaps comedians ought to be made to say, look, no, that's not very nice? You know what I mean?
I think it actually depends on who you say it to, because especially if you're saying it to someone, who is possibly, I don't know, it's a hard one. Jokes about, because obviously we were completely almost wetting ourselves at that joke that I just told about the round room and food in the corner.
Yeah.
We found that hilarious, but yet I was so offended by the Frankie Boyle thing. So I don't know, it's a really difficult one. It's a really touchy one.
I think
it maybe depends on your audience, possibly.
Well, yeah, definitely. But then, do you really... what do you think of the kind of audience that would find the joke that offended you funny? Do you know what I mean? This is the sort of the catch, isn't it?
Yeah, no, the thing is, people were saying that on the bottom of the video, Katie Price's video, about like, oh, that audience must have sort of no spine about them. But I think if you're in a situation where you're in the audience of a sort of a comedy show, and and a comedian tells a joke, if you don't laugh at that,
oh, you can get carried along, certainly.
It's a bit awkward. Imagine if you told a joke and then just everyone sort of just like, crickets, and then someone just coughs and it's just like silence, and it's being televised. It's kind of
I suppose you could argue in a way that might be a very good thing, in that it would transmit the message to the comedian, hey, look, you're over the line there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that maybe would actually be a good thing. But I think there's this thing. But obviously, I don't know what the joke was, and presumably,
I'm not going to tell it. I'll tell you later.
And the interesting thing is that, the awful thing, or the strange thing, is that sometimes I can agree that a joke is offensive, and yet still find it funny. It's like, at the end, I won't tell this joke, but there's a joke that one of my, again, an elder member of my family told me, which I know is outrageously offensive to certain people. Not disabled people, and yet, God forgive me, I still find it funny. Yeah. I still think it is funny. It's like
I think that there is actually a difference between sort of respectful jokes and non-respectful jokes. I think you can have a joke
that's it, and I think like your joke about putting a blind person in a round room with saying your food's in the corner. The point is about that joke is not offensive because it says that would be cruel. That is the question. What would be the cruelest thing ever, or whatever?
Yeah, I suppose
it says that would be cruel. It's not encouraging you to do it. It's saying that would be cruel. And of course it would be cruel.
Yes.
Although, I suppose at another level, it is implying that a blind person would be too stupid. and that takes us on to another thing, actually, because something that really does annoy me, I realise it's not something that people can change, and I understand kind of why people do it, but it is something that grates on me. When people use the word blind as a metaphor for stupid, or
do you know what really annoys me about it? Actually, there's lots of things, and I can probably rant for quite a while about this, but there are a few things about blind related things in the media that just drive me insane. Why does it make me so mad when people say partially blind instead of partially sighted?
Well, one might say that you can either be blind or not blind, can't you?
No,
do you know what I mean?
Well, for example, like people often, when I was in school, would say, "Oh, Amy's partially blind," And and I would often describe myself as being partially sighted.
I suppose because it highlights the negative. Do you know what I mean? If you're partially sighted, it means you can see a bit. Whereas if you're partially blind,
it's like
to say, in a sense. I hope I don't offend you by saying it.
I don't get offended very easily.
In a sense, to say you're partially blind is actually more accurate in the sense that that is the problem. You partially can't see.
But that's kind of like saying that you're partially perfect in a way, like sort of to say that you.
Because perfect is positive. Perfect is a positive thing, isn't it?
No, it's kind of like
I'm partially. Or I don't describe. I would. And this is interesting. I wouldn't like to be described as partially deaf either. I describe myself as hard of hearing because it is hard for me to hear. But yeah.
It's a hard one.
As I say, partially blind is more accurate in that describes the problem. You have a sight problem, but it highlights the negative.
Yeah.
Partially sighted
doesn't. It highlights that.
It highlights the positive that you can see a bit, but you can kind of argue, and this is an interesting thing, isn't it? Right? I don't know if you do now, but you did at one time wear glasses.
I didn't.
Didn't you?
No, I never. You said that to me a few days ago. You said, you actually said, I never used to wear glasses. I think I did once in high school, but I never remembered to put them on. So therefore, and also people used to say that I looked like a secretary. So I used to, but I didn't wear them since I was about 15.
Encourage you to wear.
Yes, definitely.
Obviously, I knew partially sighted people at school that did wear glasses, or at school and college. So it's an interesting question. When does someone who, like my stepdad, needs glasses? Well, my mum needs glasses, but they're not classed as partially sighted. Whereas in a way you could argue that they are, because they need glasses. So when does a person who needs glasses become partially sighted? When does that sort of
I suppose it becomes a thing where you're named as partially sighted when the glasses that you wear cannot correct fully. For example, people can wear glasses, like my dad wears glasses and he becomes fully sighted by it. But where there's for example with me, or for some people, for example, no matter they're partially sighted to the point where no matter what strength of glasses they wear, it still doesn't fully correct, and I think maybe that's that.
Yeah. Now then, I've got to. What was the original question we were discussing? Because I've forgotten.
I think we were talking about dick things to do, bad things to do to, the jokes about disability.
Yeah.
Right. Should we move on to the next question then?
Yeah, I guess so.
Right. This is one that you're going to have an interesting sort of take on.
Girl, this video is long enough already.
It is pretty long, I'm sorry. Right. We've got 2 questions left. Right. Okay, comedy for visually impaired people. Why is it harder for blind people to watch and understand comedy today than in the past?
Oh, well that's... I think that's very easy to answer, because comedy today, like all television today, is so much more visual, because you can do so much more visually now that you couldn't do then. And I know when you go back to the days of black and white television, and I don't really like this description because this is what television is anyway, I suppose. But I suppose for the people that were producing television in the sort of the late 40s, early 50s, it was pretty much radio with pictures. Whereas now something like CGI is more mainstream available, and so therefore it becomes more visual, but then it leaves people like us behind in the dust a bit, because there's only so much we can understand. And I think even I don't know, I'm thinking about it. See, like most television.
Whoa, this is a long video. Carry on.
Most television comedy that I'm into is television comedy that I have heard the radio version of, because there was a spat in the 70s, 60s, 70s, where they would take something that was popular on the telly and make a radio version of it. These days, they take things that are popular on the radio and make televisions of it. So we've sort of gone full circle.
Well, you've always said that you can't understand Friends, whereas I like Friends because obviously I got some sight. I like Friends. I cannot always understand the more slapstick visual comedy, but
I think with Friends, I don't really understand the humour anyway. I don't know. I think it's a.
But you like comedy like Dad's Army, which is obviously from when was that? The 60s, 50s, 60s?
1968, Dad's Army.
Ah, right. Which obviously is not really something that, because it's not of a time that we're really used to. It's not a commentary on today's society, so therefore I can't really understand it. To me, but then it's something that you understand because that's what you.
Partly it's because I know a lot about the period. Both the 60s. I think to really understand Dad's Army, I think you need to know a lot about both the 60s when it was made and the Second World War when it's set.
Yeah. Whereas neither of those periods of history are actually something that I'm really interested in.
Yeah. Whereas for me, they're both periods that I'm very interested in. So I do. And it's interesting. I mean, often with my girlfriend, I would often stop comedies and explain a joke and say, "This is funny because."
Yeah, see, that's not funny when you have to explain the joke. It's never funny, though, is it?
And you see, this is an interesting thing because I was going to say about visual comedy. Even when visual comedy is audio described, it is not the same as seeing the.
Exactly. You can sort of say, and so take Friends for example. You can the audio description can sort of say Chandler does a funny dance, but unless you see that funny dance and know that it's funny,
and that actually kind of goes back to me talking about my sort of describing sound to a deaf person. How on earth would you convey, the sort of why a sound like, I don't know. I can't do anything. I'm trying to make a funny noise. But if you
how can you describe that a dance is funny?
Yeah, or a noise.
If
you can't hear the see the dance or hear the noise.
Yeah, it's only that it sort of strikes with you visually, which is that makes it funny.
It hits that direct receptor. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So to speak.
So modern comedy is not something that blind people really do very well. I'm very grateful for the fact that I'm not entirely blind. Obviously, I don't have a lot of sight, but I have enough that I can understand comedy to some degree in that respect. But obviously, for blind people,
I think also a lot of it is that I don't know how blind people these days sort of deal with a lot of television. I think everything's become so fast paced that even with audio description, it's got to the point where it's interesting because they were talking about Doctor Who the other day. I was watching an old Doctor Who, and I was watching some of the extras saying that sometimes they would have a shot, a single shot with a single camera, and that shot would last 20 minutes. Can you imagine today? A single shot lasting 20 minutes. You look at today if a shot lasts 5 seconds. That things cut from one thing to another so quickly that the audio describer actually has to jabber
over the actual dialogue
to try to describe what is happening, and it gets to the point where you kind of tune out. I
was watching Moana the other day, and they have an audio described version of that.
I don't know what that is.
Moana is a Disney movie, right? It's one of the newest Disney movies. And it's at one point it sort of says, because they're talking, and then there's a brief moment where there's nothing because Moana's staring at the water, and it says in the song Moana does this, that, and the other, and I'm like, what song? There's no song. And then about 10 seconds later the song starts, and I'm like, oh, that song. But it's because it's so. Sometimes so fast paced. It's oftentimes before or after the action that I'm actually describing.
It's like this audio describer who describes Titanic. And he has this very flat, one level voice. So he will say, Quartermaster Hitchin spins the wheel to starboard. In the engine room, engineers rest up all the engines from astern. And he's just talking at this speed.
I think I've actually seen that, and I do empathise.
And
yes.
and it just be, and as he's talking, sometimes it just, and especially if there's a lot of noise as well from the film, his voice,
Yes.
at least to your ears, to my ears, sort of degenerates into a and you just kind of tune out, and it's like a jabbering speech.
And it's hard it's just hard to enjoy it then, isn't it?
It is, definitely.
I really lament the fact that
sometimes it's better. I appreciate the way that they're trying to give you a lot of detail, but sometimes it's actually better to have a little less detail, to have the detail that you do get understandable.
Exactly. I lament the fact, and I always have, and I got very sort of ranty about this a few years ago when everything it was a trend to have every film in the cinema in 3D. And unfortunately for me, because I am blind in my left eye, completely blind, to be able to see 3D things, you need both eyes to focus. And so therefore, I cannot see 3D. And everything in the cinema was being put in 3D. So that meant I just had to wait for everything to be put into film, onto DVD, basically. Yeah. And I was really upset about this because it felt just really unfair.
It's the way, the advances in technology just leave some people behind.
It does. It really does. Yeah. It is survival of the fittest for the modern day in a way.
Oh, definitely.
Because it's like it is.
It's like all these smartphones with their touch screens. I mean, I know that Apple and so on have done some wonderful things with voiceover, but it's not the same, at least for me, as buttons. It's really not.
No, I agree. Buttons are much easier than touch screens for.
I can understand why sighted people love them so much, but
yes.
Nightmare for me.
Anyway, should we get on to the final question?
Yeah.
Because we are up to. My gosh, this has been for nearly it's been through 3/4 of an hour, this video. Holy moly, choly. Right. Yeah, and actually this links in again, so well done for linking us in so swiftly and easily into the next question. So, how visually impaired people cope with the attitude of Hollywood these days of more CGI, less dialogue?
Oh, God, don't get me started on that.
Well, that's the whole point. I want to get you started.
Well, I guess the short answer is we don't.
We don't cope. No. What I'm referring to in this is that, I mean, for example, Star Trek. It started off with the original Star Trek, where it was all dialogue in the 60s. It was all dialogue, and it was all, it was stories and people-based stories. And then you had the Star Trek: The Next Generation, which again was but it had a little bit more explosions in it than the first one. And then slowly coming to Discovery, where it's all explosions and it's all the J.J. Abrams.
Star Wars is the same these days.
Yeah, See, you like Star Wars, and I'm a Trekkie.
I'm a Star Wars fan of the original trilogy, and the prequels are all right, I suppose.
The prequels are okay. Sure.
If I've got nothing better to do.
I like the prequels. Shh. But yeah, no, it's become a thing where. And obviously, as we've talked about, there are problems with audio description. So, when there's it's just all explosions or visual information, there's not any dialogue to sort of carry the story forward. So all we're getting is...
And as you lose the dialogue, you actually lose a story. I mean, I do remember once somebody saying of Attack of the Clones, to them said, for all the story you've got in it, really... You might as well play a computer game. And I wonder if films of that nature, sci-fi films, are really kind of degenerating into non-interactive computer games, self-playing.
They are. There's an episode of Star Trek called The Game, and the idea of it is that a crew member goes to a sort of a holiday destination and meets a girl who sort of gets him addicted to a game, and he brings it back to the Enterprise and slowly gets everybody apart from one person addicted to this game.
Grant Naylor's going to sue them.
Well, as we've already talked about, ideas can be recycled and are recycled all the time, but that's a separate subject. Anyway, the point is that slowly there was these like zombies that we were walking around with these sort of games, and that's how we are becoming less. What's the word I'm looking for? I'm looking for a specific word. We are becoming less triggered by our environment because we're becoming so content to just sit and watch.
Oh yeah, that is Oh, that is just so on target. That is just so on target. And
well,
it's
what
so
can I
sad.
say? I'm just so clever.
That is just so.
It is.
No,
It's a thing. And I love this. There's a YouTube channel. Oh my gosh! I know. I like to watch YouTube. I'm aware of it.
Well, I watch YouTube. I was
I
watching YouTube last night when Mum came in at 1 o'clock in the morning. Like, Dad.
But I think I like to watch things that make me think rather than things that just entertain.
Oh,
I was
right.
watching a YouTube channel called Sounds Like Rain, and
Oh,
rain
yeah.
is spelled REIGHN, like rain is in like royals, rain. And it was sort of saying, as much as media is a good thing, media can also be a bad thing. And it went through this thing where they went through the errands of the day and was sort of saying, if you're watching this video instead of playing with your kids, turn it off. If you're watching this video instead of working hard at your job, turn it off. If you're watching this video and your house is a mess, turn it off.
And you what?
If you're watching this video instead of playing with your kids,
I got that
turn
bit.
it off. If you're watching this video instead of working hard at your job, turn it off.
It's 3 o'clock in the morning.
If you're watching this if you're watching this video instead of getting a good night's sleep, turn it off.
Yeah.
And all of the things that you should be doing, and turn it off.
Yeah.
And I really like videos that aren't just sit and watch and be entertained, that do make you think.
I think so much of telly and cinema. We were talking about that on a group called Classic Doctor Who fans who dislike New Who, and it's saying that these days the viewer is basically encouraged to be completely passive.
Exactly. And I do hope, I know that obviously I do fairy videos as well, and that's mainly what I do these days, but I like to think that, especially my book as well, there is an element, we were talking about this in the last video, that my book does have an element of talking about humanity as a race and the nature of racism and the nature of...
I think the problem today, is that, we have, in terms of putting in sort of things to think about, I think that writers or whatever, or for whatever reason, I don't know why this is, but I think the media have lost the art of using a good story to raise a political issue. The political issue or whatever, these days, either they are totally absent and it's just, mindless entertainment, or the political issue is in your face. Like the new Star Wars film, where, from what I could gather of it, it was just basically this sort of really, a lot of the female characters were being shown as clever and all the rest of it, and all the male ones were being shown as, whatever. And I think, so either they're not there at all, or these things are like in your face.
That's kind of why Dan and I are both fans of Narnia. And as much as obviously we both dislike religion for different reasons, not completely, but we both dislike in-your-face religion. But I like that Narnia has the ability to have a good story while also having that undercurrent of religion. It's very subtle, isn't it?
Oh, well, it depends on who you talk to, but yeah, I have had arguments with sort of more militant sort of atheistic type people about Narnia. So, C.S. Lewis condemned Susan to hell just because she didn't like lipstick, and I said, no, that's not what happened at all. Susan didn't die when everybody else did. Sorry, but
it was kind of an undercurrent. Like you can read Narnia or watch Narnia as a kid and just see the fantasy aspect, but then as an adult, or possibly if you've been awakened to it,
all these Christian
you can see it.
metaphors.
It's not an in-your-face thing. I don't think it's an in-your-face thing.
No, I mean I didn't realise until a bit later on. I can remember saying, "Hey, Dad, isn't Aslan a bit like Jesus?" And in fact, there's an interesting thing because I've got a series of radio plays called "The Man Born to Be King," which are a series of plays about the life of Jesus. Really brilliant stuff. But the chap who plays Jesus is called Francis de Wolf, and he absolutely could, and I think almost should, have played Aslan. He had sort of the very sort of, wonderful, rich, deep, roaring voice.
Yeah, instead we got Stephen Thorne.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, very good.
He sounds pretty gay actually, which I'm obviously not.
He does not.
He does sound gay. I'm not homophobic, but he does sound gay, and the idea of a gay Aslan just makes me feel a little bit sort of like, okay, well that's a bit new, isn't it? I'm not homophobic, but I'm not, but it's just, I think when it's sort of so far out of your realm of what you think things should be, sometimes it can be a bit of a shock to the system.
I do not understand how you could think he sounds gay.
Yeah, he does. To me, he does anyway.
He does not.
Well, we will.
You're talking rubbish now, woman.
Shut up. Anyway, so what was the original point? We've sort of
about more CGI and less dialogue.
Yeah, I think we've kind of reached the end of that subject. Really,
I think.
And also, I am aware of the fact that we're actually almost at an hour long this video, so I think it's probably best if we sign off now. But we've gone through a lot actually. I'm really kind of proud of how much we've discussed. Yep. I really hope this video has made you think a little bit.
Probably sent some of your subscribers to sleep, I imagine. Oh! She struck me! That's assault and battery. That's it, I'm getting the police.
Anyway, my subscribers would not go to sleep. I just want to thank everybody. Last thing, I have 99 subscribers.
Well done.
99 subscribers. How amazing is that? I mean, that's like the best birthday present ever to have. I remember this time last year and I think that I said I had maybe like 15 subscribers.
Yeah.
And in a year, how far I've come, it makes me feel so. I know that 100 subscribers, 99 subscribers, nearly 100 subscribers, to some people is just nothing, you know. But to me, to come from having 4 subscribers, then 10 subscribers, 15, I remember only last year having so little subscribers compared to what I have now. Obviously, I'm still grateful no matter how many subscribers. The fact that I've got any subscribers is a miracle to me. But just thank you so much. For that. That makes me feel so happy. It's the best birthday present ever, guys. That you subscribe, that you view it, that you want to see what I put out. I will be doing at some point in the future a Jixie's Monthly Obsessions video. I promise.
A what?
I'll tell you that later. Tell you later. I will be doing it at some point. I know that I'm awful at I know. I'm aware. I'm aware of the fact that I'm awful at saying.
You're ragged, aren't you?
I'm a busy person, honestly, guys. This week has probably been one of the worst weeks of my life. It's been a pretty awful week.
Shall we give him a song before we go?
I feel like we should do Barney. I love you, you love me. We're a happy family with a great big hug and a kiss from me to you.
Well, you said you.
Alright, guys, we're gonna say pace now. I think we've done the disability discussion, we've done Barney, and now we're officially done. Are you gonna say pace?
Am I gonna say what?
We did this last time. I talked to you about pace. Remember, positive attitude changes everything.
Yes, I remember that. Yes.
Right.
All right, pace.
Pace.
Pace.